and everybody's gone to this minimalist approach in training, but injury rates are still sky high. So it's like, I think we've load managed to the point where we're just not loading anymore. But I will say that I believe that the driving force behind poor athletic development is the parental push to be in more lessons, more paid sports, just year after year after year. Because
All right, hey everybody, welcome to episode 401 of the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation at performbetter.com. I'm your host, Anthony Arena. Episode 401, here we go. As you know, we alternate episodes each week with Coach Boyle one week and a strength coach the next week. Today, we have on Missy Mitchell-McBeth. She is the author of Developmental to Division I, Strength and Conditioning for the Volleyball Athlete. And besides just having a long history of all kinds of volleyball athletes, including highest level in Division I, she owns a sports performance consulting company that teaches sport coaches different strength and conditioning principles that they can adapt in any environment. Very cool work she's doing with all kinds of athletes. So today we're going to talk fully about the book, kind of soup to nuts. I went through the book. I read most of it and got some really kind of good insights from Missy on this one. We talked about volleyball KPIs, the case for in-season training, residual training effects, which can be a little controversial. So she's going to talk about that. Structuring strength and conditioning sessions and practices before, after that debate, what problems she's run into with the height of the athletes, since volleyball athletes are usually a little taller, speed and acceleration for volleyball, just her definitions of those and how she trains it, different plyometrics, which a lot of people think that's all they're going to do, which might be the opposite, and integration with the coaching staff. Very cool. Great conversation. Really like Missy's approach to everything. So great conversation that I had with her coming up. Guys, Perform Better. Number one, the summits are announced. Chicago, June 12th to 14th. I will be there attending. So if you're coming, come and say hi. Long Beach, July 17th to the 19th. Providence, August 14th to the 16th. So similar to last year where they're going to open up on Thursday afternoon. This year they're featuring 3 different business talks. And then Friday and Saturday all day will be the lectures and the practicals. As always, the networking event, the social on Friday night with Kevin Hirchin playing guitar. That's always fun. And like last year, they're bringing back the networking room. So there'll be 4 different 2 lectures, 2 practicals going on. And then there's a networking room. So there'll be 2 to 3 presenters in that room, and you can go hang with them for that hour and 15 minutes, ask them questions. So it's pretty cool. Lots of great feedback from that last year. So Chris is bringing it back. Very cool. No Sundays again, and lots of new speakers. Also, we got some really cool stuff coming up. I've been talking to Kevin Brochu from Perform Better. We're starting to do a lot of different things. We're coming up with some different ideas for some different videos to add to the podcast. So I'm really excited about that, that our collaboration that continues with Perform Better. Again, I wouldn't be here without them. So really appreciate them. Make sure you check them out at performbetter.com. Let's get on the phone with Missy Mitchell-McBeth. All right, Coach. Well, thanks for doing this. I really appreciate you coming on.
thanks for having me. It's an honor.
Your book, first of all, it's called Developmental to Division I, Strength and Conditioning for the Volleyball Athlete. And Coach Boyle mentioned it a while back. He was like, Missy did such a great job with this from the perspective of being able to speak to some different segments. So the parent, the player, the coach, and even the strength and conditioning professional. Because I personally, when I was going over this, kind of zipped through it because there's a lot of like reminders, and then, ooh, I like the way she does that, or I like the way this comes out, or there's great reviews of certain things. I think another thing is it's a great book for strength and conditioning professionals to read, because sometimes the way you kind of summarize some of these concepts, it's a great way for us to speak to parents and athletes as well, which a lot of times can be an issue when we're trying to communicate to them what we're trying to do. So just great job with the book.
Thank you so much. That means a lot. That's exactly the tone that I was trying to hit. And just having dealt in high school strength and conditioning for a number of years, learning how to simplify concepts in a way that's palatable for your audience is a huge deal. And so I try to extrapolate that to the book.
Yeah, and I do. Look, everybody, Missy seems really nice, but I want to read a quote from the book. I love the feeling of theft that the sport provides. Stealing an opponent's joy as their attack ricochets off the block and straight into the floor, robbing them by digging the ball they just crushed, removing all hope as the setter dumps into open court, the ultimate blindside. You're not a very nice person, Missy.
I'm really not.
Wow, what an animal. Boy, out there. I wouldn't want to play against you. Love that kind of attitude going into it when I was listening, or when I was reading that, your story about kind of getting into volleyball. But I do want you to talk about like I told you before, I don't like the word defend, but defend the statement. Zach in his forward to the book, he had written that this book was a roadmap for transforming young athletes from developmental players to Division I contenders. And I think, we do get a lot of pushback, and there's a lot of, hey, we got to stop with, making everybody an elite athlete, et cetera, et cetera. Can you just kind of talk about that?
Yeah. So first of all, the title of the book, number one, is, if anybody understands the concept of marketing, nobody wants to read a book called Developmental to Mediocre, because number one, that's not interesting. And number two, that formula exists in mass for us in society. Like, we don't need more books about how to be average, right? Second of all, it's really a reflection on the array of athletes that I've worked with across my career. I've worked at the Division I level. I currently work with 10 and 11-year-olds all the way up to 18. So that was kind of the target of the book. Zach's statement is more to the point of, there needs to be some training along the way. It's not just a jump straight to this path. It's, let's take all of these steps to go from being a developmental athlete to a Division I contender and not ruin athletes along the way.
You even mentioned it, like by the time you get to the Plyometrics chapter 8, it's kind of like, okay, I know this is what you've been waiting for, because people really want to jump to dessert before they eat their steak. But let's talk about, just start out with a nice overview of the volleyball KPIs, because you kind of mentioned that a lot in the very beginning. Just talk about, I want you to set the tone for what we're looking at with the volleyball athlete.
Okay, so the number one KPI is going to be height. Whether people like to, maybe not number one, but that's a huge one. Height and body composition are going to be big factors in the court. Upper body power, particularly rotational power, is a big one. Obviously, we all know the vertical jump, the holy grail of volleyball, is a big one. But I think one that gets kind of swept under the rug is reactive strength. Because that's going to impact your change of direction. It's going to impact your ability to transition along the net. And then just the ability to accelerate in small spaces.
When we think about this idea of speed, we normally think of, like the track athlete, or, the like the longer distance. And so I really appreciated what you were talking about, developing those qualities and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But okay, we have all these goals, but what we do see a lot, and I was telling you, I even saw it in golf, was, some of these general programs like that people will want to go to just quote unquote get in shape. And a lot of times they're just fatiguing athletes. They're over fatiguing them, and they almost make them feel like, hey, well, you're getting in shape. Talk to us about that kind of obstacle that you're dealing with the younger athletes.
So I think a lot of it stems from poor coaching practices, because athletes really only have exposure to what adults expose them to. I mean, obviously they get on social media and they see that kind of thing, but we can help them apply a filter to that through our good training practices. Unfortunately, What we have is a lot of coaches who have not educated themselves that are using archaic training practices, which then fuels the next generation using those bad training practices. Parents think that whatever they did at, their commercial gym or whatever they did back when they were in high school football, that's a big one that you have to talk parents off a ledge, is that I know that you played high school football back in the 80s, Dad, but you don't know how to train your developmental volleyball player in 2025. So I think just kind of trying to educate athletes, educate parents, educate coaches on what safe and effective training practices are was really kind of the, point of the book, just to get away from some of those things. Because, yeah, like you said, and we kind of talked about it pre-show, these athletes are in season year round. Our purpose shouldn't be to fatigue them. It shouldn't be like mental toughness in a workout or whatever nonsense phrases people use to describe those workouts. It needs to be to hit those specific KPIs.
What were some of the quote unquote training faux pas that people were doing 20 years ago? Like what, so where is that coming from? For example, I know you said football, and being in Texas, right, you're going to get a lot of those, a lot of
Mm.
those type of parents, but what did volleyball training look like 20 years ago, really, when you were just starting out?
Gosh, when I was just starting out, volleyball training was non-existent. I was working as a high school volleyball coach, and we fancied ourselves revolutionary because we did really anything at all other than roll a ball out in the off season. Now, first of all, that was back in the day where we had more multi-sport athletes, and particularly the city that I was in had more multi-sport athletes. So it wasn't as much, the year round, we don't have time for an off season, but we did have an exclusive off season. And our entire off season was, I was telling my assistant yesterday, I think we were somewhere in the range of 500 to 700 contacts in a session, because the head coach was all about hard work and jumping for volleyball, and we got to get all this stuff done. And it wasn't because she was a bad person. She was just undereducated on what the intent of plyometrics were, what appropriate volumes were, what appropriate. I mean, we had kids jumping up off of 30-inch boxes, like hitting a ball in the air, because sports specificity is a real thing, right? And then landing. And it's like that kid's not focused on a proper landing. They're focused on attacking that ball and looking cool. So that was kind of the stuff that was going on. You would have some programs, I mean, and you still do, that are like operated by football coaches, and no knock on football coaches. Like there
Yeah.
are plenty of outstanding football coaches acting as strength coaches, or people that came from the football realm into strength and conditioning. But when you look at that football mindset that you're referencing, where it's like, we're just going to grind them and we're going to 1 RM, and like that's going to be our emphasis. And it's like, well, we need to be emphasizing overall athleticism, because that's what these kids don't get when they are playing and competing year round.
And you talked about it. There's like a 6 week break, right, between the end of the season and the beginning of the season, something like so. It's like almost that year round, and it really, you do make the case for keeping the long tail. Number one, we're in it for the long game. But I think the case for in-season training here, when you said, to summarize, the moment you stop strength and conditioning sessions, the countdown to having lesser prepared athletes begin. And you were talking about, you showed a chart with residual training effects, which I thought was brilliant. We had Alan Cosgrove on here a couple weeks ago talking about obstacle course racing and how important it was to make sure that they got their speed sessions in. And because we were talking about kind of the same idea, when you have a long race, I think you said for every hour you wanted X amount of days off. So some of these people that wanted to race once a month, they already had limited training sessions available because of all the training that, the running and the other stuff that they were doing. But then, you had to take the recovery too. So that suffers. So now you're taking away from some strength and conditioning stuff. And now you can't get those sessions in with these important qualities. Can you go over this kind of residual training effects chart and the retention, those retention numbers, and how many days if you don't train, this is when you're going to start to decline?
Yeah, so that's actually become kind of a hot topic lately in strength and conditioning. I saw a post on it a couple days ago on Twitter that the actual data behind that may be a little bit fishy. So we've all kind
Okay.
of like said, this is the chart, like these are when these things decline. And now people are starting to say, Where'd that come from? Like, what does that mean? That's not what I've observed anecdotally. So I actually want to speak to what happens if that chart is wrong. What happens if the chart that I put in the book is not accurate? So part of my purpose in putting that in there was not necessarily to say like if you don't train speed every 3 days, like it's gone, right? Because
Yeah.
what you just said, like sometimes it's going to take you 3 days to recover from a 3-day weekend qualifier tournament. If I come in and run a speed session on Monday or Tuesday, in order to not have that, to check that residual box, but now I've created more fatigue. I haven't done what I wanted to do. Right. So I don't think that we can like throw out recovery and like really adhere to these strict charts. My point was rather to include that to say, hey, like speed, power, strength, these are the things we need to be checking frequently in our training versus, one of the other things that you used to see in archaic volleyball programs, and you still see it as like, let's go tie a TheraBand on the net and do like, lazily like pull and do external rotations. And like, we never do anything hard. And then our practice is at medium intensity. And then we get in a game and we just get wiped out. So it's like, I wanted people to see that, not only more than likely do these qualities decline faster, we also need to prioritize them more heavily in our training because those are the things that are going to transfer to our sport, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
So just in case the speed residual chart gets completely thrown in the trash in the next week, I'm not rewriting that chapter, folks. Like
Yeah.
you heard it here first. There's another purpose to that.
Well, I think it's also just, like you said, I mean, like, look, it does say plus or minus, like, for example, speed was 5 days plus or minus 3. So 2 to 8 days, right? And we'll go back to the it depends. So I still think it's a pretty good guideline to look at. And, you could also go back the same way and be like, well, the strength part was 30 plus or to really 25 to 35. So does that mean we don't need strength sessions every, which is kind of ridiculous, but I thought at least it was a nice guide for looking at priorities in those in-season sessions, or that, from even a microcycle, the week, and knowing that the schedule is going to be different all the time. But looking at, hey, what's the priority? Like, let's make sure we get those speed sessions in, and maybe working on that repeated ability, as opposed to maybe the aerobic ability would come last, right? We're talking
Yeah,
about.
exactly. Because, number one, I think sometimes it's really helpful to look at microcycles as more than a 7-day window, right? Because, let's take high school volleyball as an example. We may have a match on Tuesday, and then we might play 6 games Thursday, Friday, Saturday over the weekend in a tournament. Then we've got to turn it around and do that again the next week. So it's like, where are we fitting our training in? We might get one session in that week. I can't touch every capacity during that session, or I can't touch it at a volume that's going to maintain or improve. So it's like, how do I prioritize, like you said, using that chart? Okay, we know speed is going to decline the fastest, or, power output the fastest. So let's touch those things, knowing that our aerobic capacity is going to last and also be supplemented by the things we're doing in practice, where maximum speed or maximum jump height may not be happening during practice.
Yeah. And how much are you, I probably asked this question to so many strength coaches, but where's that collaboration? I mean, is it a super high priority when you're talking to some of these, when you're consulting on these things? And not, I know you consult in a lot of different sports, not just volleyball. And I think this conversation goes across a lot of sports. That collaboration between strength and conditioning coaches and the sport specific coach, the actual coach, how do you kind of foster that communication and integration with the coaching staff just to be able to help that athlete develop?
That's a tough one. And the answer is, as always, it depends. So you have some sport coaches that are very receptive to understanding, like, hey, I may need to scale back today so that we can get a better lift in, or so that we can get a better, speed session in, or whatever it is. You have other coaches that are not going to bend on that stuff. And so you, as a strength coach, need to know that, and you need to bend on it. As a person working in the private sector, or even as a high school strength coach dealing with kids that are going to club, and you are blind to what's going on there, now all of a sudden that has to become a conversation with the athlete, and you have to develop trust in that athlete to know that what they're telling you is accurate, and you're then going to have to make your program according to that. So like I think we all have this idea that we're just going to have this like stakeholders meeting, kid, parent,
Yeah.
club coach, sport coach, strength coach, AT, and we're all going to get on the same page for every one of the, I think I have 250 athletes in my care right now, right? That's what we think. No, what I'm doing is I'm playing darts in the dark, and I'm thinking, okay, I know you go to this school and I know your strength coach and I know what your off season looks like. I'm also hearing you tell me what your volleyball coach is doing. I'm watching what's happening on the court in practice. Now I'm modifying things. And I think that that's what I've become really good at, is knowing that you don't always have all of those pieces. Like collegiate level, you should absolutely have those pieces in place. That should be a daily collaboration. If you are, if I were just training 2 or 3 teams, but I'm training 19 teams. Now, when I'm consulting for high school programs, that's kind of a no-brainer because the person that I'm speaking to is the sport coach acting as the strength coach.
Yeah.
And that tends to be an easier conversation because that's a person that's coming to me saying, I want to do strength and conditioning and be better at it. You know what I mean? So it's like,
Yeah.
I don't have
Yeah.
that pushback. I don't have that struggle. And even I was working with an NAIA program this fall because one of our coaches that I work with up at club is also their coach. And it was like, she sent over her schedule. I said, hey, here would be my recommendations on hard and easy days. Here's what we're doing. And like it, even with me not there, it was great because she was willing to look at the training process as a whole instead of strength as one entity and sport as another. That's kind of a circular answer. I don't know that I actually answered your question, but
No, you did. I think what I liked what you said in the book too was, and I want to see what's been the reaction when you're talking to people about this, is simply reduce the practice volume. Because a lot of times you're looking at some of these practices that are 2 to 3 hours, right? And you said simply reduce practice volume 20 to 30 minutes just twice a week and implement an in-season strength and conditioning program in its place. How much has has there been pushback for that? Because I think it's an amazing idea. Just like, hey, 20, 30 minutes, take that, make that the strength and conditioning.
so I don't know that I've necessarily gotten any pushback. Again, like there's a little bit of bias in a person that is purchasing a book for strength and conditioning. Like
Yeah.
there is some interest there. I'm not going up against the person that's like, we can't sacrifice time because they're buying a book or they're getting consulting or they're listening to a speaking engagement,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? But where I think that that line is helpful is when I came from the Division 1 level down to the high school level and I'm in my job interview. And they're like, well, you'll have a 45-minute class period. And I was like, whew, that's tough. 45 minutes to get twice a week to get everything I need to get done. Well, then I actually get there on campus, right? And it's like, well, it's not 45 minutes because they've got to dress in. So that's 5 minutes. Now we're down to 40. I got to dress back out, or I'm saying those wrong, but another 5 minutes. So now we're down to 35. Coach needs to tell them something for 5 minutes. So now we're
Yeah.
down to 30 minutes twice a week. How are we going to get this stuff done? Like impossible, can't be done. So I had to learn to program around time constraints. And I think that a lot of people are deterred in starting strength and conditioning programs because they have the perception that a session has to be 1 hour because that's what their own personal workout is. Or they go to an exercise like a fitness class and the fitness class is 50 to 60 minutes. So they're like, how could we possibly get any benefit out of a 20 to 30-minute workout? Which literally in the last 8 years that I've trained, the longest sessions I've had were 60-minute sessions with high school football, which that's an easy sell. You can get all the time you want with high school football kids. But every other group was twice a week for about 30 minutes. And like how I've broken that up has been different in different contexts, but you can get a lot done. Now, am I ever going to hit, like, are we ever going to be as fast as we could be or, as explosive? No, because I don't have that much time. But again, if that's all you have, I don't think people should be deterred by starting something or trying to get something in. Even if you have to then take that, like it might even need to be broken down further because that's even in the situation of like, oh, 2 30 minutes a week. Well, that assumes that you have the weight room for 2 30 minutes a week or you have the turf for 2 30 minutes a week or a gym. You may not. You may have 2 scheduled weeks in one of those or 2 scheduled days a week in one of those facilities. What are you going to do? Well, now it may be breaking it down to 10 minutes on the front end of practice and microdosing it into 5-10 minute sessions. So it's just kind of like, again, you just got to figure out where to put it in and what works best in your program.
Yeah, and you actually just kind of answered a little bit of one of your answers would be for this next question, which was we were in an earlier episode, there was a kind of a big debate about doing strength and conditioning before practice or after practice. And so where was the priority that day, or where was the priority in the program? And, you don't want to get fatigued for the practice. And, then if you do it after the practice, then, is strength and conditioning suffering? And I told you, we talked about Sean Skane, my first guest on this show 18 years ago, was he working for the Anaheim Ducks. And what they were doing was, and now most of the NHL does this right after the game, they got 15 minutes. And I actually witnessed one in the Ducks locker room one year. It was pretty cool. They kind of, they're already warmed up. They come in, they bang something out. There's like 3-4 exercises and they got it done. What's your opinion on this? I love that idea about you might have to 10-minute microdose every day. So what other options have you seen for that?
You know, this is where I wrote the book the way I wrote it. Like everyone has these, I have a whole shelf next to me where it's like all of these written from an ivory tower in a perfect situation. And these are the rules, right?
Yeah.
But I've done it literally every way. I've trained teams before practice. I've trained teams after practice. I've had half of a group thrown on me during the middle of practice. You know what I mean? And it's just, when is the facility available? Like people don't want to talk about that stuff, but sometimes you train based on that's my weight room time slot at the high school level, or that's my team's time slot. I have too many teams before their 8 o'clock practice, so I have to train somebody on the back end of their practice. So yeah, I mean, I've done it a number of ways. I think that lifting pre-practice is totally fine because like why is what you're doing, is it going to be so different than what you've been doing previously that you're going to induce a whole bunch of fatigue in season? Probably not. The backside of, but that could be tricky if you do want to, do something higher intensity or you do want to push volume a little bit. You've got to then work with your sport coach if that's an option. Back end of practice, like you said, I spent a number of years in Division I basketball. I think that we all know, or many people know, the joys of Division I women's basketball coaches and what those practice volumes look like and that kind of stuff. So it's like you have kids coming in on the back end of a 2.5 hour practice for lift, and you have all these things planned, and it's like, well, we're going to throw that out the window and completely regress either our intensity or volume or maybe the entire exercise just based on what they've seen. So I think that once again, the answer is it depends on your situation. I don't think there's necessarily a right answer that's going to fit every single situation every single time of the year. So I think it's just one of those deals that, again, it depends. I know that's not a great answer. It's not one that people want to hear, but
You got to be flexible, and you really have to kind of take it with your situation. Like you said, I mean, there's different. Sometimes you don't have the weight room. Sometimes you might be just doing body weight. Coach Boyle talked a lot of times when he was at the rink, they had the one dumbbell workout, right, that he came up with for these hockey players because they didn't have a weight room at the rink, and that was the time when they had to do it. So you really got to be flexible with some of the stuff. So. Let's go into really in the very beginning of the book, you talk about what is strength and conditioning for the volleyball athlete, but then you get into basic movement patterns and progressions. We won't go too much into that here, but I do want to ask you a couple questions about it. And one of them was, you talked about, one of the KPIs was height. What are some of the problems that you've run into with height? I know you talked about the squat. Since, volleyball athletes are usually a little taller, what are some of the considerations we should think about?
Yeah, I mean, just what best fits your athlete. So sometimes you will have a tall athlete with long femurs that looks great squatting because they've got the mobility to do so. They've got the, patterning to do so. And so you're good. Other times you've got kids that are just like folding forward to hit that position. So it's like, are we just going to continue hammering that round peg into a square hole or whatever? Probably not. So we're going to squat on a wedge at that point. And then it's like, if I still have stuff that I don't like and we're not cleaning it up with cueing or, regressing or whatever, they may just not squat. They may go to a single leg. Like we'll do a high box step. Like if we want to hit that deep range of motion and they don't have the control to single leg squat, we might do a high box step up with a controlled eccentric. Like we're going to find something that works for their body type. And so that's where like, yeah, I mean, those chapters are like, here's your 5-part movement progression, but there's like so many other bits and pieces I may add based on individual, needs that, but yeah, I mean, that's a big one, squatting, obviously. And then just because your range of motion is so great, you tend to not have they tend to not be weight room athletes, right? Like they're not like the strongest athletes in your weight room because they are having, they've got such a great distance to move. But again, like we're going to meet them where they're at and progress from there. I had someone, come up to me this week and they're like, my volleyball girls are so weak. And I'm like, they're not football players. Like we can't expect them to look like football players in there. And we need to kind of treat them and train them accordingly.
When you're looking at the hinge, I know you like to kind of go right Romanian deadlift, that type of lift. You love that, but you don't really teach the trap bar deadlift until last. Talk to us about why. And the reason why I'm doing that is because we just had Coach Boyle on talking about how he never has really done. He doesn't like the Romanian deadlift, and that he is a big fan of the trap bar deadlift. So I want to prove him wrong and why he's wrong. So.
Oh man, I wish I would have done my homework on that so we could get in like a fight like on
Yes.
2 back-to-back podcasts and then we can like take it to social media or something. No.
There you go.
So again, this has just been my experience. And one of the experiences that I had at the high school level is I just all of a sudden had this like group of parents on a witch hunt and they were like, deadlifting is bad for your back, da, 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 da. And I was just like, what, like, first of all, what are we even talking about? Like a trap bar deadlift is a half squat. Like, let's be real. Like, it's not a deadlift, guys. And despite like best education, I even had I had a mom who was a PT of a baseball kid, and she was like, my son can't deadlift. And I'm like, well, actually, your son's trap bar deadlifting. Here's the research. Da, 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 da. She's like, oh, well, I wasn't made aware of that. I was like, actually, you were in the meeting that we had, and I gave you the program, and it was exercise 1A on Monday. So you were made it anyway. So just experiences like that where it's like, if it's going to raise, yes, you can educate. And this is again where people are like, oh, well, you just have to teach people and show them. And here's the deal. When the witch hunt is in progress, sometimes you are not going to be able to argue with ignorance. You are not going to win that battle. So it's like I had to take a look at my program and I'm like, okay, if I want to train the hip hinge and I don't want to deal with all this nonsense, what can I do? Well, we can just RDL. And then I was like, I never really have problems with kids ego lifting during RDL. So what if we just got pretty strong at that before we started to learn how to trap bar deadlift? And then it's like all of a sudden I would just be like, okay, it's that thing we've been doing in an RDL, but now we're moving it to the floor. Obviously, there's nuance there. There's, different movements, all that kind of stuff. But I just found kids to be better prepared going into that. I feel like because trap bar deadlift is seen as so, quote, easy to teach, I think that people let kids get away with pretty sloppy technique. Like I see it all the time. I'm not going to sit here and say that if your spine comes out of neutral, like your, discs are just going to be exploding everywhere. Cause I think we all have kind of gotten away that everything has to stay perfect all the time. But at the same time, some of the stuff that I see, like athletes have, like they're not bracing, they're not actually setting themselves up well. They're just ripping their first rep off the floor. And then every rep after that looks great, right? Because you don't have the eccentric portion of the movement coming first. So they don't load themselves. I think I said in the book, it's like you get under a heavy squat, you feel the weight, you figure out real quick, you better be tight before you start that lift. You don't have that feedback in a trap bar RDL because the weight's sitting on, or trap bar deadlift because the weight's sitting on the ground. Again, can you coach around that? Yes. This is just what I've found more effective in my teaching progression is to get them good at RDL first before moving on to trap bar deadlift, because I know they're going to have a strength base then before we go start figuring out like, ooh, how much weight can I pull off the floor? Because again, like you can educate all you want, but high school kids, middle school kids, they're still going to be high school and middle school kids. So I think that you have to find what works for you and for your program.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you 100% because a lot of times I tried to explain to him blue in the face about not jerking things off the floor, kind of taking that slack out of the bar first, getting that brace, setting the lats, right? And before you pick it up, just got to get that brace going. But for some kids, some mostly adults too, they can't get that. So I think you have to go by, I've taken the lifts out sometimes, like a chop and lift, for example. I don't do the chop and lift. Why? Because I'm horrible at explaining it. I've never been good at explaining. I'm like, it's out. It's not that important to me. I can't do it. So, I think I agree with you 100% on that. Sometimes it's just the way, the progression. You're going to get to it most likely, but if you don't, you're still getting some good value out of the other lifts.
Yeah, and I actually like two things on that. One, I think that that takes a lot of humility as a coach to just be like, hey, like this exercise has some value, but I'm just not good at teaching it. And that's probably part of it is that like it's not that I'm bad at teaching trap bar deadlift, it's that I'm better at teaching RDL first and then moving it. Some people are better the opposite way. So I'm not going to sit here and be like, you shouldn't like teach
Yeah.
trap bar deadlift first because a lot of people are super successful with it. But I did see, I saw Tim Pilo. I don't know if I'm saying his last name right, but he was the director of sports performance for USA Volleyball. And he spoke on spine health in volleyball athletes. And he basically said, he's like, people teach trap bar deadlift first. He's like, I don't. I actually teach straight bar deadlift first because it teaches people to set their lats where the trap bar deadlift doesn't. And I was like, that's one of the first other people that I've seen talk about that or think about that. Now, one thing I do like to use, I posted a video where we have they're the little inflatable things that are like a little half dome. And I just have kids squish them underneath their armpits and hold them while they're trap bar deadlifting because that's going to give them an external cue to force them to use their lats early in that teaching process.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I've always used the like a lacrosse ball when I'm doing like single leg presses. The other hand is gripping that ball. I remember
Mm-hmm.
doing the RKC. I think they because everybody didn't have enough lacrosse balls. They just take your water bottle and crush your water bottle while you do your press, right? So, but I always like that idea. Let's move into speed because it's funny. As soon as I was thinking about speed, when I was okay, I'm interviewing Missy, and I want to, and okay, speed's going to come up. And then in the beginning of the book, you're mentioning Tony Holler and a lot of the feed the cat stuff. So I was like, oh, I, because I worked with golfers for so long, that question would come up like, does a golfer need to train speed? Like, because it's only swing speed, they're staying still. And I always said, yeah, they still can benefit from a lot of that stuff. And you address it right away. Much of the sport of volleyball is played in a 9 by 9 meter box with 6 players, each charged with covering an even smaller area. That being the case, there's a tendency in the volleyball community to ignore the basic motor ability of speed due to the lack of specificity. After all, we're training volleyball players, not track athletes. So can you go over a little bit of just kind of the difference between max velocity and then acceleration, which is kind of where in my head I was thinking, that's what we're going to be working on, change of direction, acceleration first. And really your philosophy on speed training for volleyball athletes and maybe some of your feed the cats rules. I know it's a lot right there, but
Yeah, that's a big question. So one, all of our current training is focused on acceleration versus max velocity. As we were talking off air before, I don't have a facility that lends itself to max V. My turf is about 35 yards in length, and I think most team sport athletes are going to be at max V at like 20 to 30 yards or so. But we then don't have enough space to run off. So we're basically 10 into a 10-yard fly. So we're like 20 yards. If we're on the back edge of the turf, like toe in the parking lot on our start, we can get a 15 into 10. But so the bulk of it is acceleration based. I think there is merit to getting into max V because then you're moving the needle on actually what that top end speed is versus acceleration is like how fast can I be fast versus how fast am I kind of thing. But like I said, it's going to be more acceleration. And to me, the value for a volleyball player, again, they're not a track and field athlete, but I think there's two big pieces. Number one is we're training, again, developmental athletes that do not have a broad movement vocabulary. So, what can we do from a general movement capacity, from a coordination standpoint, that's going to make them better on the court, right? I think speed is a great way to develop coordination with anybody, period. Two, we talk about reactive strength and we talk about the foot and ankle complex and how important that is for jumping. I think a great way that is going to move the needle on, how that foot, how that ankle works is sprinting. And I think that that's not something that we're going to be beating the crap out of athletes with when they're at school or, whatever. So I think that that's a way that we can still get some volume in. Not volume's the wrong word. Tony Holler would come strangle me right now if you heard the word volume in the context of speed, but we can get some work done without continuing to just hammer the same patterns of jumping over and over. And my N of one study is, so everybody take this to heart and do this because obviously it works. It's worked on one person. But no, I always find my athletes to test better, and I always test better if I have done accelerations, if I have done speed work prior to doing my vertical jump testing. The potentiation factor there, being more warm, whatever you want to call it. I think that there's going to be some transfer there.
You do speed drills as well, right? Because I know, talking to Coach Boyle again, he doesn't do speed drills. He might add some things in the warm up, but they're not really teaching like really the mechanics of speed. Can you talk about that? What
Yeah,
you're doing?
so when we're doing that, we're doing like some A series work. So all totaled, last night we did some A marching with some like spine rotations, which I don't really necessarily think is a speed drill per se. We were using it for something different, but what we might do like 10 yards of A march, like two sets of 10 yards of A march, two sets of 10 yards of A skip or like an A switch. And then we'll go into some extensive plyometrics. So one, I think it's just like, hey, let's learn what sprinting is supposed to feel like, look like. Now let's go do it. How much transfer is there after they've been sprinting poorly for 16 years or 18 years? I'm not really sure, but at least we're showing them those positions. I think it's also a good way for me to teach a proper foot strike with their plyometrics. I think sometimes if we're like, hey, go jump, let's get a midfoot strike, they're going to immediately default back to what they do in their jumping patterns where they have not been taught to jump and they're like very toey in their landings versus I feel like when we do some speed, some A series work beforehand, and we've been focusing on attacking the ground with a midfoot, like striking underneath the hip, then all of a sudden it's like, okay, that thing we just did, now we're going to do it while jumping. And all of a sudden it's like it clicks with them because we've taken something that's less familiar, broken it down, had them do it. Now let's take that and apply it to something that we do all the time. Again, are they then perfect little jumpers out on the court? No, but we're adding some plyometric volume without overtaxing them because we're doing it with better technique.
I want to kind of get into plyometrics, and I think I was saying earlier when you get to the chapter, it's like, all right, the chapter you've all been waiting for, right? Because a lot of people in I know that was really more for the parents and maybe the coaches, like because they think that's what they're going to do to kind of move the needle. But talk to us about your philosophy on plyometrics, your maybe a little bit about the volume or the danger of obviously too much volume because they're getting that, and maybe some of the things that you like to make sure that you get accomplished in those plyometric sessions.
Yeah, so the danger in it is that they play now, let's see, tournaments start in mid-December, and they go nationals is now around 4th of July week. And then they'll finish nationals, they're home for 2 weeks, and then they start high school volleyball in Texas. I'll speak to Texas here. I know different areas of the country are a little bit different. Now, North Texas specifically went ahead and did something really great last year, which was to let people make offers for next year's club season during the current season before nationals had occurred. So then on top of the competitive season, now all of a sudden we have 5 nights of tryouts a week. All of this work is being conducted on sport court, which is basically plastic court with a tiny little mat underneath it on top of concrete. And that's nobody's fault. That's what gyms can afford to put in. But kids are basically jumping on concrete hundreds of times a day year round, right? So then it's like no matter how great what it is that I'm doing in a strength and conditioning session is or appears to be, it's still more. No matter what, you're still adding volume. So that's kind of the danger, and kind of my thought process has evolved a bit over time with that. Where when I was at the high school I was at, we won a state championship, number one nationally ranked team in the country, nationally ranked in the country. Good line there. Couldn't figure that one out. But anyway, number one team in the nation, right? We've got Gatorade National Player of the Year. We've got 5D1 commits, like we've got all the things, right? So those kids played more than anyone I've ever been around because again, those are the top players in their age group. So they're taking, 70 swings a match at high school, also club season. So my philosophy was I know they're jumping a bunch with their trainer or whatever at club, which I'm now the trainer in air quotes at club. They're jumping with that person. They're jumping during competitive play. They're jumping during practice. So we're not going to jump. Like we're just not going to. We're going to lift because that is a bucket that I know they're not getting filled anywhere else. And we still won. We had relatively few overuse injuries. And so it was just kind of like, okay, cool. That's the model. The sum total of, I say we didn't jump. The sum total of our jumping was like we would superset between sets of like hang cleans or squats. We'd superset either a one jump or a four jump on the just jump mat. Right. And we'd keep our little records or whatever on the board. And kids liked it. They compete. It's the same concept as running a fly 10, volume super low, but it's fun and I can make sure they're, jumping as high as they can. So move forward to now. And it's like I look back at that, and everybody's gone to this minimalist approach in training, but injury rates are still sky high. So it's like I think we've load managed to the point where we're just not loading anymore. Kind of couple that with learning from, going and seeing some of like Matt McInnes Watson's work with plyos and kind of like what he does from a volume perspective, and all the extensive plyometrics, like kind of got me thinking, if we can condition people basically to tolerate a little bit more load and move the needle on that, I'm probably actually doing my athletes a disservice by not dosing in some lower level plyometrics where we are getting, the learning curve of, learning proper foot contact and learning better jumping mechanics, but in a safe way that's not applying a bunch of extra load to their body. Probably doing a disservice by not dosing some of that in. So when I started working with a club last year, I'm doing more of that really than ever. And then now that, so we do like November, December, we do when they're not in tournament seasons, high school's kind of chill because it's holidays and whatnot. We're kind of upping our volume on that, on our extensive or light tier plyometrics, whatever you want to call it. Now that they're moving into their qualifier season and extra practices are getting scheduled, plus they're getting wrecked at school, I'm scaling that stuff back and we're actually going to more deep tier landings because I think that that's less shocky on their joints. So we're still getting some of the benefits of jumping. It's probably more fatiguing. It is more fatiguing from a muscular standpoint, but I'm not necessarily like super concerned with that because our volume's pretty low, but we're just taking the shock out of it. And we'll see. This is actually going to be my first time transitioning into these deep tier jumps. We'll see what kind of feedback I get from them, and then I also want to just kind of check it with our RSI numbers to see kind of what impact that has. But I really try to look at what I know is going on around and build the program based on that. Like in my book, I kind of use like a strict, like, here's the, low, medium, and high volumes, like out of, whatever textbook that I think it's like NSCA had like the old recommendations. That's not necessarily what I use. Like I don't follow that rigidly, but I also like know the rules so I can break them kind of thing. That was
Sure.
included in the book because for people that have no concept that there's different types of plyometrics, people that have no concepts that you should actually think about or count or calculate your volume, I wanted them to see like, hey, here's like max recommendations for you to work within, and here's some different types of plyometrics that you can use. The parent situation is I'm not a parent, and I will preface with that. So I'm never going to tell people how to be a parent. But I will say that I believe that the driving force behind poor athletic development is the parental push to be in more lessons, more paid sports, just year after year after year. Because I think most coaches realize because most coaches aren't the only coach. There's a club coach or a select coach, and then there's a school ball coach. And they each know that the other one's doing something and they may or may not like it, but they're aware that all of that stuff is going on and that they're tired from this or tired from that or whatever. For whatever reason, and athletes are aware because they're in the middle of it. For whatever reason, parents are like, no, more. Like, why are we not playing? There's a tournament next week, and why are we not playing it? Like, why are we only playing these 3 qualify? So anyway, yeah, parents are an interesting one from a plyometric standpoint because they only think that volleyball is about jumping higher. And it's like, no, when your kid comes to one of my workouts, like, we're going to be addressing a number of qualities in here, and jumping, there is going to be jumping in there because I have to address that quality. I have to teach that skill because it's a skill as well as an ability. But that's not the only thing. We're not just going to go jump on a box for 50 minutes.
Yeah. I've told this story before on the podcast, but I had a young hockey player, a couple of hockey players who basically, the one dad was who I grew up with. He, he's one of those more. This is what we got to do. And then, the kid would come in. I would be like, well, what are you guys doing? Even it was off season, but they skate so much. Like, oh, we're doing a skills session later. I'm like, oh, I don't want to interfere with that skills session. So I would always kind of have to tailor and be super flexible with that. And it sounds ridiculous, but the best time that I had with them was during COVID because they weren't able to skate. So I trained them in my facility that I was kind of renting from for like 3 weeks till they shut us. They were like, you can't be. They found out we were sneaking in there. It was just like 3 of them. And then I was training them I went over to their house. So I would go in their yard, whatever. But he gained like 10 pounds in 3.5 months because he wasn't able. I said, listen, you guys got to understand that you're never going to do this. You're never going to have this opportunity again. This is going to be such a blessing because you don't have school. You're not waking up early to go to school. You can't go to the rink. And really, you can focus on strength and conditioning for the first time. And they're like 17. So the testosterone's flowing. It was perfect timing to just kill them for 3.5 months, put a lot of volume on because they were able to get through. And, they're both at high level right now. And so they understood, they put that commitment in, but it's funny. I had a few of those, obviously. And then, but it's nice when you can kind of get that time and break and not have to worry about the 47 other things that they're doing.
Yeah. I think that's a big piece to working with athletes at the middle school and high school level is that, I think a lot of people want to model it after collegiate training, or you have all of these people that are like, train like a pro. And that's not what a kid's schedule's like. They're sitting in a desk for 8 hours a day. They maybe ate breakfast. They might have had Cheetos for lunch. Like, and people can be like, oh, well, that's their fault. And okay, shut up. Like, they're kids. Like, they're going to make bad decisions in spots versus a pro is like, I'm eating here, here, and here for the most part. Obviously, we can think of some examples that don't take care of their bodies. But I think that's something that we really have to take into account with our training volume is that they are pulled in all these different directions. They have stress from academics. They have stress from social lives. That, all these different pieces that I think a lot of people don't factor into their training that I think is really relevant at this age. And I think a lot of times, parents don't factor in the fact that stress is stress. So they think that like, okay, well, we can just go add more practice, more this, more that. Well, no, you can't because their bodies physiologically are just a wreck all the time. They get no recovery at any point in their schedule. So that's a whole nother rant, but
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because Devin McConnell, I don't know if you know Devin, he's the strength coach for the Utah Hockey Club in the NHL. And when he was in the collegiate setting, the games would end around early December, let's say December 2nd, 3rd, 4th, right? That last weekend, bam. Then they had off until whatever Christmas tournament. So what he would do in the gym normally was kind of like, cool, we got, they don't have anything to do. And he would kick their butt. But then they figured out they were doing a lot. They monitored them with stress, et cetera, or HRV. and they was like super high, and they were like, what are we overtraining these guys? And what he realized was finals are in December. So there was all this stress of like kind of trying to catch up to stuff because they've been playing. And then they had finals, you know, let's call it December 16th, 17th, and 18th, right? And so there was all this stress from that, lack of sleep. They were trying to catch up. And so he had to start dialing it down at those times. And that's when, you know, you talk about kind of Sapolsky type stuff, right? The stress is stress. It's all the same. And I just thought that was really interesting to go. That's when we really started to think, wow, we need to start thinking about some of the other things that these guys have in their life beyond the sport, you know, the school and the stress and the friends and, you know, the phone and the video games until 1 a.m, you know, so.
Yeah. And it's for whatever reason that just stimulated this thought. Like, I used to be this very like militaristic, like rigid in my approach. Like, we're not talking, we need to be focusing, all that kind of stuff. And now it's like, if you watch my training session, like my kids are like laughing, smiling, you know, and some of it's the context, but another piece of it is I know there's so much stress, there's so much sit down, shut up, do as you're told during their day. And it's not that they're not doing as they're told. It's not that they're off the rails, but at the same time, like, I've had sessions that are so structured that they're stressful for kids and that they just kind of crush their energy. And like, I don't want to be that way anymore. Like, I don't want them to feel more stressed by my presence. Like, sure, should the workout be stressful in some way? Absolutely. But I try to make the environment less stressful for them. And I know that, you know, the mental toughness enthusiasts would be like, oh no, it needs to mimic the game and like the opponent's not going to, but I mean, again, like we don't need to just stack stress on stress on stress. And some of that comes from our demeanor when we train athletes. And that was something that's been really in the last like 5 years that I finally figured out like, hey, like everybody's happier. And like, even though it may like be a little bit more silly in spots, we're getting the same, if not more work done with me being less of an ass.
I think there's actually there's some research on like lifting and smiling and strength. There's actually some. I remember Dr. McGill was even talking to me about that when in a previous interview. So there's something to it. Um, let's just get an overview for now of, and I know you do this in the book, reducing the likelihood of common volleyball injuries. Can you tell that story of how you thought you were like had the whole injury thing solved, and then, you know, your husband walked into the kitchen and you were
Yeah.
crying? Can you just tell
Yeah,
that?
if I can. So it's actually interesting when I read that story, and I might cry now talking about it, but
Oh,
when I read that story every time, like I've read it 100 times in the editing process of the book, but it makes me cry every time.
oh,
So I was probably, I don't know, 29, 30, and I had had to that point, so 8 years of coaching, volleyball, women's basketball is what the story is specific to, zero ACL tears. And we had a kid that came in, she had one prior ACL tear, and in her immediate family, there had been eight when you include her second. So obviously there's some genetic factors going on there. And we're at a game in Oklahoma, and I've asked her if I could share this story and all her details and that stuff, and she's cool with it. So we're at a game. She goes up for a layup. She comes down and she's on the ground, and I knew immediately what had happened. Didn't need to be told. Like, I think that was actually a game our head coach got kicked out. It was just a bad night. It was a real bad night. So we go in the locker room, we go home, and I had talked to the athletic trainer, and actually we didn't even talk. I just looked at her and she nodded, and I was like, I won't say the word that I said, but we drive home that night, and I get home and I don't even like go to bed. I'm just like drinking in my kitchen. And which is that is not a frequent occurrence for me. Like, I drink like one drink at my house every 2 years or something. Like, so my husband comes in and he's like, what is wrong with you? And I'm just like, she, Jada tore her ACL. And I can barely spit it out. And so I'm like, my program is wrong. I failed her. And so that's how I felt, is that like, I didn't, it wasn't that my program was wrong and that I felt that I needed to do it. It wasn't that. It was that I believed that I'd failed her. And so the next day I'm like going in and I'm like, well, should have been more of this here and more of that there. And they go in and do her surgery, and I guess her like femoral notch is just like non-existent, right? They're like, yeah, this was gonna happen no matter what you guys did in training. And so yeah, so that was kind of the turning point for me because before that, if you would have asked me, like any presentation I was giving was about injury prevention because obviously I had the secrets to injury
Yeah.
prevention. And every time I stepped out on the floor and an opponent had to kid in a knee brace, I was just like, well, I have zero knee braces on my team and aren't I superior to you? And it's like, I mean, people like I could name names of strength coaches that are on the opposing sidelines that I'm all like, I'm so much better than you, whatever. So just absolutely absurd. And like in that moment, and then the outcome of the surgery, and then having a few other injuries along the way, it's like I can't control everything. And no, I don't have the secrets because if I did have the secrets, I'd be making a whole lot more money than $48,000 as a collegiate assistant strength coach, right?
Yeah.
So there I kind of changed my approach to like, or at least my verbiage to injury reduction, which I think is all that we can do. And I think that that's a multifaceted approach. I actually just posted a video today. Like I use the analogy of baking a cake, where it's like, the box of mix. That's your arm swing. If we're talking shoulder injuries for volleyball, that's your arm swing technique. If that sucks, it doesn't matter what else we did. It doesn't matter what I do in strength and conditioning. You're always going to be hurt because you do a whole lot more swinging at the volleyball than you do lifting weights or doing prehab exercises. So that's the first thing. And then it's like the binding ingredients. So eggs and oil, that's your strength training. That's going to hold everything together. And then it's like, okay, now we have the oven. Appropriately applied volume and intensity. We go too hot, too much time, we're going to burn it. We don't cook it long enough, hot enough, it's just going to fold up and be soggy in the middle, right? That's volume intensity. Then frosting. That's what everybody, we talked about earlier, like, oh, what did volleyball training used to look like? Oh, little prehab exercises with a band or like little pink dumbbells or whatever. Yes, there's a place for that stuff in your program, but you're not just going to sit and, I don't know, maybe you would sit and eat that out of a can, a frosting out of a can, but I wouldn't. And then the one piece I didn't put in the video, but it's like you can't frost a hot cake, right? Like you've got to let that thing cool off before you. So that's your rest and recovery. So just speaking to the fact that if we want to produce this product, it's an amalgam of all these different things. Because I get asked all the time, like, do you have an arm care program for volleyball? And I'm like, I sure do. It's literally everything we do when we walk in the door,
Yeah.
from big exercises to little to looking at arm swing mechanics, those kind of things. So that's kind of my approach, and I obviously take that approach with every joint. Like we can't just like isolate it down to a few things for ankle, isolate it down to a few things for knee. It's got to be a holistic look, and it also includes like the athlete taking care of their business, eating at the dinner table and hydrating, and making sure that they're not scrolling like you mentioned earlier. We've got to get sleep. That's a piece of the injury equation as well.
Yeah, I like to tell when I get that asked that question, I am on way we say, well, look, there's a lot of nails in that coffin. It's
Mhm.
not just one, it's so you can't just look at one thing a lot of times. And then when they ask me about stuff and I'm working, let's say if they have a shoulder issue and then I start going thoracic spine and even hip stuff. And I say, look, we're looking for the source, not the site. Right. So similar kind of approach, the joint by joint idea as well. Right. Kind of it's not always, we don't always, if it's a knee problem, we're probably going to look at the hip or the ankle. Right. So just kind of looking at that holistic approach as well. So good stuff. I've taken enough of your time, so I will say you did a great job with this book. I will say we didn't go over any program design, but we kind of did. So, in a lot of different ways. So that is in the book as well. Coach, thanks for doing this. Great job with the book. Great job with the interview. Love what you're doing. Thanks for coming on and being patient with me over the last couple of months. We've been trying to get this scheduled. So,
Yeah, thanks again for having me on.